What about Italy? Because we've had elections at the beginning of this year, 2018, and then there was no government, and finally, I think it was around about June, there was a coalition set up between La Lega, which is a right-wing, and Five Star, which is a left-wing, but both Eurosceptic parties. So we've got an interesting situation in Italy, Eurosceptic government, but they haven't been allowed to choose their own chief ministers, have they? So what's happening in Italy?
Well, there again, the ECB intervened into the forming of the government. That means the designated finance minister that the new government wanted to put in mentioned that he wants the ECB to cancel 250 billion euros in debt. The ECB immediately intervened and contacted the president of Italy and said, you're not going to let them take over. You have to do new elections in autumn, and in the meantime you have to put in a technocrat to run the government. And only when the Lega and the Five Star movement backed down from this demand of 250 billion cancelling of the debt, then they were allowed to form a government. That's why it took so long between the election in March and then the forming of the government in June. So Italy is totally under the control of the ECB. And it's not the first time, because remember Berlusconi, there was a putsch against Berlusconi and he had to step down because the ECB intervened by increasing the interest rate for the Italian government bonds. And they forced him to step down. So the ECB is constantly intervening in all the governments. And they are saying who is going to be in the government or not. The financial system says that, and not the democratic election.
No, I know you've been looking at what's happened in Genoa, this horrific Morandi bridge collapse, and questioning as to whether that might be deliberate. Is there any evidence that the bridge did not fall by accident?
Yes, there are a lot of evidence, and I can all list them. First of all, when I saw that only video done by this guy, Daniele Di Giorgio, he is the only one who actually filmed the collapse. I mean, you can see the partial collapse. I noticed at the beginning of his video that there were two bright lights lighting up. I said, oh, that's funny. That first there is this bright light going up twice, and then the bridge collapses, or the column collapses, because the bridge was already down. I mean, the road track was already fallen. And I said, gee, that looks very much like a controlled demolition. And then I was thinking, a structural engineer from Germany, and he said to me exactly what I was thinking. And he's an expert in bridge building. He told me, according to that video, that was never just collapsed by gravity. The force of gravity cannot destroy a bridge in that way as it was destructed. So these light flashes that you see at the beginning of the Di Giorgio video, it doesn't look right. And then we continue. Then the media said, well, it was because of lack of maintenance and corruption, blah, blah, blah. But this is also not true, because Professor Antonio Brenzisic, who is the professor for building and construction at the University of Genoa, said that this bridge, I quote him, the bridge was monitored by a pool of experts. There was never a lack of money. The bridge was continuously maintained. So the story in all the media that the bridge collapsed because lack of maintenance is not true. It was in a good state. And the company, the Autostrada d'Italia, in charge of the bridge, said that this bridge would have lasted 100 years. And therefore, this whole collapse thing, because of lack of maintenance and deterioration of the material, is just not true.
But they have actually shown, haven't they, photographs, pictures up close underneath the bridge where you can see it's like a whole patchwork of repairs. It does look as if it's a bit of a cowboy job.
Yeah, but every bridge. I mean, how long have the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge been standing? And there you can go and see rust They're continuously getting rid of the rust and painting it. The same is with all the bridges across the Hudson River in New York, etc., etc. There is a constant maintenance because you have to do things. So, of course, if you are actually looking for it, you will always find something. And now they are just pushing this narrative. Then, of course, there are all the witnesses who have come forward now and said what they experienced. Like Davide Capello. He was sitting in his car driving across the bridge when he heard a huge bang, and then the bridge dropped in front of him. And then he himself fell down with his car 40 meters. And he was saved by his airbags, which opened up when he hit the ground. So that means there was first a loud explosion and then the bridge collapsed. Right? So that's one witness, but there are more. There's this guy, Piero Giorgio. He said, I was sitting with my mother in my car underneath the bridge as the surrounding lit up bright and there was a big bang. So that also confirms that first there was a big light flash and then the noise of what could be an explosion. And then he said, then a strange thing happened. My car started bouncing up and down, and I thought it was an earthquake. Well, all this description describes an explosion. And there are more witnesses who are saying things like that. So how can you believe that such a complete destruction and crushing of all this concrete and steel and everything can only be caused by gravity? That's ridiculous.
Underneath the bridge, where it was railway lines. Couldn't the flashes just have been the bridge falling on the electrical pylons on the railway?
No, and I'll tell you why. You see, a short circuit of these electrical overhead wires of the railway can only cause a spark if they touch the ground. So you have to have grounding. But the bridge was on top of it. The bridge fell onto the cable and pushed it to the ground. So that means you would never see a flash because the bridge would be on top of the cable and suffocating any short-circuit light flashes.
How easy is it to blow up a bridge?
It's very easy because in many countries in Europe, like in Switzerland, Germany, and in other countries, there is a special chambers built into all the bridges which are filled with explosives. You see, all the bridges are, from design point of view, made in a way that you can destroy them. Because if there is a war, you blow up the bridge to stop the enemy from using them.
Now, hang on, because are you saying that the explosives are in there all the time, or that there is a special place you can place the explosives?
Well, both. For instance, in Switzerland, the bridges had the explosives in this special chamber, and they were only taken out about 10 years ago. But anyway, there are chambers in all the bridges by design to be filled by explosives so that when this is ignited, the bridge collapses. That's done by design because of, if there is a war, you can destroy the bridge so that the enemy can't use them.
What about the CCTV? Because you would expect that there would be quite a lot of CCTV footage showing the bridge falling.
Exactly, but they're not showing them. That's exactly the point. They've only been released 3 videos up to now from these CCTV cameras, although the whole bridge and the whole access roads to the bridge, they are full of cameras, but they've only shown us 3 videos which don't tell us anything. They don't show the actual collapse. And that is also very suspect. Because why aren't they showing us all the videos so that we can see, oh yeah, that's how the bridge collapsed? No, they're not showing them. They're hiding them. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the Pentagon at 9/11, because there were 85 cameras all around the Pentagon, and they haven't shown us one single CCTV footage of this plane hitting the Pentagon. We have never seen this CCTV footage from these 85 cameras. So also those are hidden, because then we would know the truth. And the same thing looks like it's also happening with this bridge.
Now, there's a massive tower which did collapse. Many people would say, Manfred, well, look, if the roadway collapsed by fatigue or accidentally, even though, of course, it wasn't all that heavily loaded. I mean, apparently there are traffic jams on that bridge sometimes which make it much more heavily loaded. But if it did collapse, the roadway would then possibly bring that enormous tower down, because it would be only pulling on one side. A whole massive roadway pulling one side of the tower when the other side is gone is likely to bring it down.
Well, that's also a very, naive argument, because on the contrary, the column was so massive. It had such a massive foot, a very broad foot to stand by itself. And if the roadway would collapse, there would be less stress on the column. Less stress, because the road is gone. How can it then collapse? And you see it also in the DiGiorgio video, that the column was still standing when the road collapsed, and then the light flashes came on, and then the column collapsed. So this is how the sequence was. The sequence was, first the road fell down, the column was still standing, then there were two of these light flashes, which could be the explosion, and then the column collapsed. That's how the sequence was.
Well, it wasn't the only bomb to take place in Italy, because there was also an attack on the other party that the Five Star Party are involved in. And Grillo and the Five Star Party are based in Genoa, so it's right on their home territory. But right across the other side of Italy, in Treviso, near Venice, is where the La Lega had a bomb outside their offices too. Actually,
two. You're right. There were two. One exploded and the other one was diffused. So, in my opinion, if you ask me what is actually happening and why is it happening, this is an attack by what you could call the deep state against this new anti-EU government, to kind of tell them, well, you know, if you don't follow the rules, you will have terror in your country. And we will do things like that. Because remember the Bologna attack, right? The Bologna attack, which happened on the 2nd of August in 1980, where the railway station in Bologna was blown up. 80 people died and 200 were injured. And this was blamed on the Red Brigade. And the reason was that at that time, Italy was leaning more to the left. And this was a signal that you're not going to go into the left or communist area. But actually what happened was that after a lot of research and looking into the whole thing, it was found out that the NATO secret army, the so-called stay-behind army, Gladio, was behind this explosion of the Bologna railway station, plus the Italian Secret Service and the Freemason Lodge P2. They were all involved in this explosion. So this is not the first time that there was a kind of a false flag attack against the threat of a left-leaning government. Now we have more a right-leaning government. And they want to teach them a lesson and say, hey, you know, do what we say or you will have terror.
Well, there's also attempts by the new Italian government to set up a parallel currency to the euro, which was reported by Forbes magazine as being the biggest threat to the euro.
Absolutely, because, I mean, if Italy leaves the Eurozone, wow, I mean, then you can definitely say the euro is gone. I mean, that's over then. That's why they're doing everything to keep Italy in the euro and in the EU, either by telling the president who has the authority to actually designate the government by going through him, or by doing these terror attacks, these false flag terror attacks, right? And that's all threats. to the new government to be careful and not realize the promises they did their electors. You know, they promised a lot during the election, that's why they got elected, but they can't do them because of these threats.
So, look, let's just take a step back from this. Who could possibly have carried out such an operation?
Well, demolition experts from the military who are taught how to destroy bridges. I mean, they teach them that. There are whole groups of military personnel who are specialized in blowing up things. Every army has that. And these are recruited by the deep state or by the secret services to fulfill these operations. And then, of course, they control the narrative through the media. You see, every time one of these operations happens, there is also a media script running parallel to what is happening. You see, the media is fed the narrative parallel to what's happening, so that the people are then told what to think about this event. I mean, that happened in 9/11. Only in 9/11 the script was faster than the action. Remember that? About World Trade Center 7? Where the BBC and CNN were saying that World Trade Center has collapsed, but it was still standing. That means the media script was running faster than the actual things are happening. That was a big mistake. And that's why all the big news media were saying, well, the World Trade Center has collapsed. But actually it collapsed a half an hour later. That would be like a TV station saying, well, Bank X has been robbed. But it wasn't robbed. It was robbed and half an hour later. So how did the news people knew that it was going to be robbed? That's one of the big questions that nobody has gone after.
Most people will think, well, nobody would do such a thing, Manfred. Nobody would do such a thing to kill so many people deliberately.
All wars of the last 150 years were created by false flag operations. Going back to the Spanish-American War, where the American ship was blown up by the Americans in the harbor of Havana, to blame it on the Spanish so that they can do a war against Spain. It already started at the end of 1800. And all other wars are like that. The First World War, the Second World War, the war in Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats never happened. It was a complete lie by President Johnson so that he could do the Vietnam War.
No, but there's no war started in Italy.
Yes, it's not a full-scale war, but it is a war against the people. It's a war against the democracy because their wish, what they did by electing this government, is not being fulfilled. The government can't do what it promised.
Can you tell us where we can find your commentary and your reports on the Morandi Bridge collapse online?
Well, if you Google ASR, you will probably find all my articles I've written, or if you enter ASR and Genoa, then you will find all my articles about this event with videos and photos and what the witnesses said and what the professor said and all these things.
And finally, is there anything you want to add? Any other big things going on in the world you'd like to talk about?
Well, look what's happening with Turkey. I mean, that's a huge blackmail and a financial crisis that Trump has created because of this fairy tale that it's about this pastor that has been arrested or is under house arrest in Turkey. Well, that's a lot of isn't it? This is a huge attack against Turkey, who is a NATO member. I mean, you said before, well, people think that nothing like that would happen. But the governments, they don't care. They kill people without batting an eye. They're not human. They don't think like us. They think about power and all these things. And I mean, also what I'd like to mention, that this week was the 65th anniversary of the putsch in Tehran against the democratic elected government of Mossadegh. I mean, I studied this very carefully. The reason was because Mossadegh wanted to take over the oil industry. You see, it was run by the British Oil Company. He wanted to nationalize it. You see, in 1908, this British Petroleum Company was created, which was the forerunner of BP. And it was specially created to suck all the oil wealth generated in Iran out of the country and giving the Iranians nothing for it. Nothing. They got 1% of what was generated there. And then Mossadegh came along and said in 1951, 52, we can't keep going on like that, because with the oil revenue we could cover all the budget needs of the country and we could develop the country, etc. And then the British came along and said, well, you're not allowed to do that. But because the British government was totally in debt after the war, they went to the Americans. Because America took over the whole imperial system from the British after the war. And then the CIA and MI6 created the Operation Ajax, which was the putsch of the Mossadegh government. And they financed demonstrations in Tehran, and they corrupted all the military and politicians, etc., etc. And then he was arrested, Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah was put into place, a puppet of the Americans and of the British. And after that, Iran became a dictatorship run by the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. I actually visited this embassy. You can visit it because it's a museum now. And you can look how an embassy, American embassy, actually functions. And it's incredible what they have. They have a whole department which can create false documents and passports and everything. They have a glass room which is made out of glass. Can you imagine that? So that you can't listen onto it. They had all this communication equipment. So what it means is that the American embassy in Tehran was the actual government of Iran. And that's, by the way, why the students ran onto the territory of the American embassy and took hostage of all the people who were working there, because they knew that it was actually the government of Iran.
Well, fascinating and very topical too. 65th anniversary of the overthrow of Mossadegh as well. But Martin, the main thing is this Morandi bridge. Also, there's another I came across. Luciano Goccia was in his lorry directly under the bridge. A pressure wave threw the truck driver out of his vehicle, not the falling debris. He was opening the door to get out, and then he heard an explosion. When he turned around, he was thrown through the air.
Well, in Italy, as been pointed out, there's a long history of false flag terrorism. Operation Gladio was based in Italy. Imposimato was the head of the Italian Supreme Court, wrote a book about all this that came out in 2012, and he was the investigating magistrate. It's beyond dispute that false flag terrorism is, Italy has had lots of experience of it, well, anyway, and it's quite possible this bridge has been blown up.
I shall put a link up to Manfred Petrich, his Alles Schall und Rausch, which means all smoke and mirrors. It's in German, but I'm sure you can find some way of getting it translated, and it's got lots of links, and I'll put plenty of links up on our show page at thisweek.org.uk. Fascinating insight, I think, into what we're not being told by the mainstream press. I would like to see at least some interrogation of these various facts. And I know right now in Italy there's all sorts of pressure being put on by the families of people who died to get that CCTV released. Let's see how they get on. So, time to sign off for the Murdoch News at 8 now. You'll find this show's podcast, story links, comment page, contact details at thisweek.org.uk. I'm on Twitter, at Tony Gosling. Here's wishing you a relaxing and enjoyable BCFM bank holiday weekend. Do please join us for the politics show at 6 o'clock next week. God bless. And don't let the banksters, Draghi particularly, get you down.
On the hour, live from the Sky News Centre.